Hello, welcome back to the Crime Gist. You, Kamakawa, can call me Damisa. Today we will look at a story of a young man who was born into privilege and wealth, but whose life took an unexpected path that would lead to a very tragic end. Hailing from a prominent political family, this young man seemed destined for a bright life right from the moment he was born. His family had connections that reached the highest echelons of power in Kenya, which, of course, is where our story today took place. Instead of making better use of all the resources and connections his family accorded him, this young man had something else in mind. He instead chose a life of violence and destruction, something that people familiar with this case still struggle to understand to date. So, just stick around for all the gist on this one. Thomas Warui Njoka, alias Thomas Gagula, was born on August 28, 1992, to David Njoka and Catherine Njoka. He was the second born in a family of 3 kids. Thomas grew up with his older sister and his younger brother. They lived in Langata, Nairobi West, which in those years was an area that only the high class in Nairobi could afford to live in. His father, David, was a senior manager in the Ministry of Health. His maternal grandfather, Clement Lubembe, served as both a member of parliament and an assistant minister in the Kenyan government. The Attorney General of Kenya at the time, Mr. Githu Muigai, was his uncle, that is his mother's brother. His mom, Catherine, worked as a youth counselor in Kenyatta University. Safe to say, Thomas was born, privileged. Growing up, he did not lack a single thing. He had good father figures and men to look up to in his family. His mom was a staunch Christian who brought up her kids with Christian values. David and Catherine took their kids to the best schools their money could afford. They especially had high hopes for Thomas. Being their first son, they thought he would follow in his grandpa's or uncle's footsteps and get into politics or some kind of leadership position. Thomas did well in his primary school and would go on to attend Pioneer School in Maragua for his high school. This is where, looking back, all the trouble with Thomas would begin. His classmates in high school remember him as a spoiled kid who liked to cause trouble and get into trouble. After his first year in high school, his grades would begin to decline drastically. Some say he started being a petty thief, where he would steal things from his classmates, ranging from clothes to books to pens, which of course left many of the students wondering what a rich kid like him would be lacking to turn into a petty thief. In Form 2, he was involved in an indiscipline case, which led to his being expelled from the school. They sent him home, but when he went home that day, he never went back to school ever. He completely dropped out of school. His parents tried to urge him to go back and finish his education. They promised to support him. They would do anything, including taking him to any school of his choice. But as they would soon find out, that was the farthest thing on Tomaso's mind. He refused to go back and opted instead to move out of his parents' house. He was tired of being constantly bothered about going back to school. He packed his bags and went to Kayole, where he would rent a single room and start his life away from his parents and the high expectations they had of him. Having come from a rich family, he was considered a quote-unquote cool kid in Kayole. He therefore got friends very fast, but alone and away from his father's protection, he was vulnerable to meeting all kinds of people in that kind of environment. But this is the life he had chosen to dive headfirst into. He was, in fact, very fascinated by the ghetto life he had discovered in Kayole. It was different and more exciting than the rich life he was used to. In a few months, he had made a few friends, and one who stood out was a matatu tout known as Kevin Lumide, or by his street name, Kevo. Kevo was well known in Kayole, but rumor had it that he worked as a tout by the day and a fearless thug in the night. He was said to be the leader and founder of the Mauki family gang, which was a fearless gang that operated around Kayole and Umoja. Tomaso soon fell in love with the matatu culture he experienced whenever he hung out with his stout friend, Kevo. This is basically all the loud music, graffiti, lights, and the entire glamour of the matatu culture as seen in the public transport scene in Nairobi. Kevo was able to use his connections to secure Tomaso a job as a tout for a matatu dubbed Telebang. Telebang was one of the most prominent nganyas or matatus plying the Umoja Kayole route at the time. Tomaso settled well into his job and seemed to really love it. He was known to have a magnetic personality and was therefore popular and loved by many. And also, being a cool kid, everyone wants to hang out with the cool kids. His style was expensive shoes and jewelry. People who didn't know his family background would often wonder how his simple tout job allowed him that kind of flashy lifestyle. At the same time, Tomaso liked to party a lot. He would often be spotted in city clubs and bars surrounded by beautiful women as well as young men. On most nights, Tomaso and his group would buy expensive drinks and even spoil everyone in the club. The group was popularly given the name Team Chafua Meza in clubs around Nairobi because they would literally fill the tables in clubs with drinks. Tomaso's favorite drink was Black Label. He also loved chewing cats, smoking some devil's lettuce, if you know what I mean, and listening to reggae music. With this kind of lifestyle, Tomaso felt untouchable. He would slowly get lost in the evils of the street life. With time, inevitably, he got sucked into the criminal world. His life would soon be marked by violence and a web of grievances. His involvement in crime would become even more evident when Kevo, his stout friend, was gunned down after exchanging fire with police. Kevo had been on the police wanted list and was being tracked in the days leading up to his death. His gang, the Mauki family gang, which had been terrorizing Nairobi residents for a long time, had been on police radar for a while. Now, their leader lay ganged down, bringing to an end the life of a man Tomaso had come to admire and love. After Kevo's death, Tomaso's life would take an even darker turn. He became associated with another notorious gang known as the Kayole Gaza Boys. The Gaza Boys gang was involved in a range of crimes that involved carjackings, murder, kidnappings, robbery with violence, burglaries, among other crimes. This gang stands as one of the most notorious gangs to ever disgrace the streets of Nairobi. The gang members were described as flashy with multiple rings around their fingers and also gold-coated teeth. A lot of them wore skinny jeans to keep their weapons in place. Armed with pistols and knives wherever they went, they did not hesitate to kill just to steal a phone or some pocket change. At the slightest provocation, this gang was ready to shoot their victims, from women to children to old people. They were brutal and feared in Kayole and across Nairobi, where they conducted most of their criminal activities. Most times, they would hijack or kidnap people, forcing them to withdraw money from the ATMs. They would then return later in the night to make further withdrawals, most times after harming their victims in some type of way and demanding for the pin. All over Kayole, the gangs raided homes, stole cars, killed, robbed, and committed all sorts of crimes. Kayole was literally a scary place to go to or live in during those days. The police, after a surge of crime in 2013 and 2014 in Kayole and surrounding towns, had begun their investigations on the gang members in a bid to stop them and bring them to justice. Meanwhile, Tomaso's father had got wind of his criminal activities. But after several failed attempts to get Tomaso back on a straight path, he gave up and even went as far as disowning him. He wanted to completely distance himself from what would be considered an embarrassment to the respectable family. There is nothing he or anyone could do to stop Tomaso. He continued his reign of terror and partying all over Nairobi while managing to escape the police. Tomaso Gagula, as would later be found, had even come up with a hit list and wanted to execute anyone who had wronged him in the past. His downfall would start when he and his friends murdered a police officer in Langata. This incident painted a serious target on his back, with law enforcement officers determined to bring him down. Over a short period of time, several members of his crew would meet their demise in the hands of police, and he too would soon face the wrath of the law. They trailed him for a while, but every time they got close to arresting him, he would somehow evade them. In one particular incident, Tomaso and his crew attempted to rob a petrol station in Kangundo, but that plan would fail when police were called to the scene. However, before the police could nab them, they managed to flee from the scene of crime. In yet another incident, on August 14, 2013, Tomaso and his crew were lured into a trap where they expected to sell a stolen car to a prospective buyer in Buruburu. In a hail of bullets, lives were lost and Tomaso was left seriously injured. He also lost one of his crew members and a close friend known as Lenny Keiza Mpole in this incident. Lenny was only 21 years old at the time of his demise. However, not even the loss of his friends was enough to deter Tomaso from the dangerous life he was living. He continued in his ways without a care in the world, not knowing that his time was also coming. The police, out of concern, at one time called his parents in Langata, urging them to come get their son because his 40 days were drawing near. They claimed it would end badly for Tomaso because he had refused to change his ways. His parents called him and tried to talk sense into him. His mom especially was so emotional and couldn't understand what her son was lacking. All he had to do was come home. Tomaso, while on phone with his mother, vehemently denied any involvement in any crimes. But in the same breath, he declined to go back home. His mom was inclined to believe that her son was still the good boy she raised. This went on for some time until August 2014, when his criminal activities would eventually catch up with him. This incident started on the 13th of August when Tomaso and 3 other members of his gang carjacked a man in South Sea as he was waiting for his friend's gate to be opened so he could drive in. They forced themselves into his car and drove towards Mombasa Road. Somewhere around Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, they threw him out of the car and sped off. The man later reported the incident to the police. 2 days later, at around 11:30 p.m., a car matching the description and number plate of the stolen car was spotted by officers around Buruburu Shopping Center. There were 3 young men in the car. It was parked close to an ATM where the officers noticed 2 of the guys alight and walk towards the ATM. In a short moment, one of the young men spotted the officers and alerted the other. The 2 found a way to escape, leaving their friend in the car. When he noticed what was going on, he tried to drive off while exchanging fire with the police. He was, however, fatally shot, dying on the spot. Upon closer examination, the deceased was found to be 22-year-old Tomaso Gagula. Now, his life of crime had eventually caught up with him. He had ended up dead like his friends Kevo and Lenny. As seen on his social media accounts, 2 days before his death, Tomaso had been mourning his friend Lenny Mpole, who had been gunned down exactly a year before. He captioned, "I miss you big time, brother." Writing below that, "Your soul shall always remain in our hearts. It's your first anniversary. I hope wherever you are, you still know that we miss and love you. Going through some of the other posts on his Facebook, you can see clearly how risky of a life this young man lived. He lived life on the edge, knowing he would die any day. In one of the posts made 5 months before his death, he wrote, "You only have one life to live. You live it to the fullest, not knowing what happens tomorrow." It is very sad to see that this is the kind of life he had chosen to live. His funeral was a spectacle like no other. Gangs from all over Eastlands, which normally would be fighting each other, united just to pay their respects to Tomaso. Chaos ensued as jewelry, drugs, bottles of alcohol, knives, and even guns were tossed into his grave. Noisy matatus, denganyas, hundreds of motorbikes all flooded Langata Cemetery. His father, who had disowned him, would not let his body be buried in his own property, and that is what led to Tomaso being buried in Langata Cemetery. Despite his tumultuous life, Tomaso's mother still had a lot of love for him, even paying back some of the people who had accused him of theft or robbery. At some point, it got too much because people were sprouting from all over, claiming that Tomaso had dropped them. Even after his death, Catherine celebrated his birthday every year by posting heartfelt posts on her social media, reminding him of her love for him. She would sadly pass on in the year 2021. May her soul rest in peace. In the aftermath of Tomaso's demise, the Gaza Boys gang split up, making way for new players like the enigmatic Mwani and his girlfriend, who was dubbed Kenya's prettiest gangster. If you want me to do a deep dive into the story of this infamous gangster couple, let me know on the comment section down below. Tomaso Gagula's story is still a complex narrative for me to wrap my head around. His life choices remain shrouded in mystery. We might never understand the reason why a young, promising man like him chose the dangerous path he did, but eventually, this dark path led him straight into his death at a very young age. This cementing what the wise men say, that choices have consequences. And this should be the lesson we take from today's story, guys. We have come to the end of that. Thank you so much if you have got to this point. Please don't forget to subscribe, comment, and share this episode with other true crime junkies like yourself. I'll see you right here on the next one.